By the pool. She kept her gaze locked on me. I knew what was coming before she spoke. And when she finally said, "You're making it hard for me to behave," I felt I couldn't behave anymore either. I'm Ethan, 21, living in Santa Barbara, and I work for a small but reliable pool maintenance company. It's not the kind of job people dream about, but it works for me. Pays decent, keeps me outside, and I like how there's a rhythm to it. Brush, skim, test, repeat. Most of the time, I pull up to a house, knock, and someone points to the backyard without even making eye contact. I do the job, leave things spotless, and move on. But this day didn't start like that. The job ticket came through that morning from my boss. Debris removal, basic chemical check, filter flush, upscale neighborhood, new client. I didn't think much of it until I punched in the address and the GPS led me toward a part of town I usually only drive through. The kind of place where every house looks like a postcard and the sidewalks are too clean to be real. High hedges, long driveways, security gates. You know the type. I slowed as I reached the address and took in the house. A massive Spanish-style place with cream stucco walls, red tiled roof, and elegant black iron gates that had already been opened. A pair of luxury cars were parked neatly in the wide driveway. I parked behind a silver Jaguar, took a breath, and grabbed my gear. Walking up to the door, I half expected some staff member or housekeeper gun to answer. But when the door opened, it was her. She looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Not in some flashy way, but like someone who just knew who they were. Early 40s, I guessed. Tall, graceful posture. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a loose, intentional way, like she hadn't tried hard, but somehow still looked perfect. She wore a soft white blouse that floated just slightly in the breeze and fitted linen pants that matched the warm tones of the house. Bare feet, polished nails, and eyes that paused on mine long enough for me to forget what I was supposed to say. "Hi," she said, her voice smooth and warm. "You must be Ethan." Yeah." I nodded, holding up my clipboard like it proved something. "Pool service." She smiled, stepping back. "Come in. I figured you might want something cold to drink before getting started. Lemonade or water?" I blinked. That wasn't how this job usually went. "Lemonade sounds good. Thanks." She turned and walked through a wide sunlit hallway that opened into the main living area. I followed a few steps behind, trying not to stare at the art on the walls or the way everything seemed to glow in the light. The house didn't feel cold or staged. It was elegant but lived in. Books on side tables, a faint scent of gardenias, and something more subtle, like vanilla. Out on the patio, the pool was even more impressive than I expected. Wide, crystal clear water surrounded by palms and sun-bleached lounge chairs. I set my supplies down, still a little off balance from the greeting. A moment later, she returned with a tall glass of lemonade, condensation already forming on the outside. "Here you go," she said, handing it to me. "It's hot out today." "Thanks," I said, taking it. "This is a beautiful place." She gave a soft laugh. "It's been a work in progress. Bought it a few years ago and slowly made it mine." We stood there for a second, both looking at the pool. "I'm Sophia," she added, looking back at me, in case the job ticket didn't say. I shook her hand, careful not to seem awkward. "Nice to meet you." "Well," she said, her voice shifting back into something lighter. "I won't keep you. I'll be around if you need anything." She stepped away but didn't go far. I saw her settle onto a lounger with a tablet in hand, legs tucked to the side, eyes occasionally drifting up toward me. As I got to work, I started with the basics, testing the water chemistry, skimming debris, brushing down the walls, the sun be down, and the rhythmic work was usually something I could lose myself in. But every time I caught a whiff of her perfume drifting over the patio or heard the faint sound of her laugh on a phone call, it threw me off just a little. It was like I was aware of every move I made. Still, I kept it professional. This was a client, not someone I should be thinking twice about. At least that's what I told myself. By the time I got deeper into the pool maintenance, I'd mostly settled back into my usual groove. At least I was trying to. Every time I looked up, there she was, Sophia. Sometimes on her phone, sometimes just lounging, sipping something from a tall glass, and sometimes not doing much of anything except watching me. There was something about her presence that didn't feel like background noise. It was deliberate, not pushy, not even flirty, just there, like she was aware of me in the same way I was trying not to be aware of her. I focused on the filter system next. The thing was nearly spotless, like it had been serviced recently, which made me wonder if she really needed someone to come out or if she just wanted the visit. That thought hit me quick and unexpected, and I pushed it away, no reason to assume anything. I crouched down by the pump, checking the pressure gauge when I heard her voice again, closer this time. "You're very serious when you work." I looked up. She was standing a few feet away, one hand resting lightly on the back of a chair, watching me with that faint smile that didn't give too much away. I straightened. "I guess I get in the zone." She raised an eyebrow. "The pool maintenance zone." I laughed, brushing a bit of dirt from my glove. "Hey, it's a real thing. Skimming leaves requires intense concentration." She tilted her head slightly, still smiling. "I believe you. You're very focused." There was a second of silence between us. Not awkward, just full. Then she added with a light tone that somehow felt heavier. "You're making it hard for me to behave." I blinked. It wasn't just the words. It was the way she said them. Playful but not careless. Like she meant every syllable but didn't need me to react. Just wanted to put it in the air and see where it landed. I chuckled, shaking my head as I knelt back down. "I think I'm just here to clean the pool." "Of course," she said, and I could hear the amusement in her voice. "That's exactly what you're doing." She didn't walk away right after. I felt her linger for another few seconds, then heard the soft pad of her bare feet on the patio tile as she returned to her spot under the umbrella. I didn't look back. Couldn't. My heart was beating just a bit faster than before. The rest of the job went by slower, not because of the work, because of her. The way she moved around the space, like she was letting me see just enough of her world to make me wonder about the rest. She never made anything overt, but everything about her said she was aware of the effect she had. When I wrapped up the chemical treatments and double-checked the equipment panel, I started packing my gear, telling myself that was that. A nice client, a good tip maybe, and then I'd be on to the next house. But Sophia had other plans. She appeared again just as I was loading the last of my equipment into the truck. "You did a great job," she said, standing just inside the shadow of the front walkway. "The pool looks like something out of a magazine." "Thank you," I said, trying to keep it cool. "It was already in great shape." "Well, now it's perfect," she said. "And since you're done, I was wondering something." I paused, curious. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Would you stay for dinner?" "I made way too much. It's nothing fancy, but there's a bottle open, and it feels like a waste to eat alone." I hesitated, mostly because I knew what saying yes might mean, or at least what it could start to mean. But I also knew I was curious not just about her, but about what made her invite a 21-year-old pool tech to stay for dinner in a house like this. I gave a small nod. "Yeah, sure. I can stay a bit." She smiled. Not the polite kind, but the real one, the kind that reaches the eyes. "Good. Come in and wash up. I'll plate everything." Inside, the house felt even warmer than before. The sunset light filtered through the large windows, casting everything in a golden haze. The air smelled faintly of rosemary and something grilled. Music played softly from somewhere, low enough to feel casual. She led me into the kitchen, which was like something out of a high-end catalog. Stone countertops, copper pans hanging neatly above the island. Little touches that showed someone lived here, not just owned it. I washed my hands at the deep farmhouse sink, catching my reflection in the window above it. I looked a little sunburned, hair a mess from the heat, but somehow none of that felt like it mattered. She handed me a towel and gestured to the table. We ate outside under the covered patio. The food was simple. Grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, crusty bread. But it tasted like something more because of the way it was shared. We didn't talk about anything heavy, just random things. Music, old movies, places we'd been. I learned she used to live in San Diego, that she owned a small business she'd sold a few years back, that she liked to paint but hadn't touched a canvas in months. I told her about my job, my roommate, how I ended up working pools after leaving community college. She asked real questions, the kind that made you feel like she wasn't just filling time. Somewhere in the middle of laughing about my worst customer horror story, I realized I was enjoying this. Not because it was new or exciting, but because she actually saw me, not just the kid cleaning her pool, something else. And I was starting to wonder if she felt the same. By the time we cleared the plates, I'd forgotten I was technically still on the clock. I was leaning back in the patio chair, stomach full, watching the last sliver of sun dip below the horizon. The lights from the pool had come on automatically, casting a soft blue shimmer across the backyard. It looked like something out of a vacation ad. Peaceful, quiet, private. Sophia stood and picked up our plates without asking, and I instinctively got up to help. "You're a guest," she said, shooting me a look over her shoulder. "Sit. Wasn't I your employee 2 hours ago?" I joked, following her into the kitchen. Anyway, she didn't answer right away, just smiled faintly and began rinsing off the dishes. I took the hint and grabbed a towel, drying them as she handed them off. "Thank you for staying," she said eventually, her voice quieter now. "I know it was kind of random. I don't usually do that." I shrugged. "You made dinner. I just ate it." She gave me this loose side glance like she didn't buy my nonchalance. "Still, you didn't have to." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just kept drying dishes until the last one was stacked neatly on the rack. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, just open, like something was waiting to happen. But neither of us wanted to rush it. When we stepped back outside, the air had cooled just enough to feel like summer was ending, even though it wasn't. Crickets had taken over the soundtrack, and a breeze rolled in from the coast. "I always forget how quiet it gets out here," she said, folding her arms as she looked out at the pool. "It's nice," I said, and I meant it. She looked over at me again, that unreadable expression on her face. "Do you have somewhere to be?" I shook my head. "No plans tonight." "Good," she said, walking past me toward the front of the house. "Come on, we're going for a drive." I stood there for a second, caught off guard. "A drive?" "Yeah," she said, turning to glance back at me, eyes glinting. "You've been very responsible all day. Time to be a little spontaneous." Before I could think of a response, she disappeared inside. I stood frozen, unsure if she was joking. But a minute later, the garage door hummed to life and headlights swept across the stone driveway. Her car, a sleek silver convertible, rolled to a stop in front of me. "Are you coming, or are you scared of doing something off script?" she called, her voice teasing. I smiled despite myself, climbed in, and buckled up. The top was down, and the second she pulled out of the driveway, I could feel the salt air rushing past us. The engine purred, and the road opened up in front of us as she drove toward the coast. No small talk, no music, just wind and the hum of tires on pavement. I glanced over at her a few times, her hair loose now, caught in the breeze, one hand resting casually on the wheel. She looked more alive than before, like she needed this as much as I did. "You said you don't do this often," I finally said. "I don't," she replied, eyes on the road. But something told me tonight needed to be different. We drove along the cliffside highway, the ocean to our right, glowing under the moonlight. It felt like the world had shrunk to just this stretch of road and the two of us in the car. I wasn't sure where we were going, and I didn't care. Eventually, she turned off onto a quiet side road that led to a small beachfront bar tucked away behind some palms. No neon lights, no crowds, just a few parked cars. The sound of waves nearby and low music drifting from inside. "This place okay?" she asked. I nodded, already unbuckling my seatbelt. Inside it was cozy. Wooden booths, surfboards on the walls, a few locals chatting softly over drinks. Sophia ordered a glass of wine. I got a soda. Still technically on the job, I told her with a smirk, and we slid into a corner booth. The conversation picked up where dinner had left off. Only this time it felt different, looser. She told me about growing up near Monterey, how she used to sneak out with friends and drive to the beach at night, about her first job working at a hotel front desk, about the time she flew to Italy on a whim after quitting a job she hated. "I used to be more impulsive," she said, swirling her wine glass. "Then life got busy, serious, safe. And now?" I asked. She looked at me, really looked, Now I miss it sometimes. I didn't push for more. She didn't explain further, but I understood what she meant. When the bar started to quiet down, she glanced at her phone and then at me. I have one more stop in mind, she said, slipping her phone back into her bag. If you're up for it, lead the way. Back in the car, she took a turn I didn't expect. Heading uphill this time instead of back toward town, we were driving toward the cliffs, and I didn't ask questions. The car slowed as we reached the top of a quiet overlook. The kind of place locals knew but tourists never found. The ocean stretched wide below us, dark and endless, lit only by the moon and a few scattered stars. Sophia parked near the edge, turned off the engine, and just sat there for a moment, her hands resting loosely on the steering wheel. Neither of us said anything. Then she opened the door and stepped out barefoot again, heels tossed in the back seat. I followed the air cooler up here, the kind that raises goosebumps whether you're cold or not. There was a bench facing the sea, weathered wood, paint chipped, half covered in ivy creeping up from the slope behind. She walked straight to it and sat down, pulling her knees up slightly, wrapping her arms around them like she'd been here before. I sat next to her, careful to leave enough space that it didn't feel like too much, but not so much that it felt distant. For a while we just listened, waves crashing gently below, the whisper of wind in the dry grass, distant hum of the freeway way off behind us. It felt unreal, like we'd slipped through a crack in time where everything paused and no one else existed. You ever done this before? She asked suddenly, still looking at the water. What? Sat on a bench with my boss's client at midnight. She laughed softly. No, just this. Taking a turn off the main road. Let the night pull you somewhere new. I thought about it. Not really, I admitted. I'm kind of a routine guy. Wake up, eat the same thing for breakfast, hit the job list, go home, repeat. That sounds suffocating, she said. It's safe. She looked over at me, her expression soft but serious. Safe is fine until it becomes lonely. I nodded. I didn't know what to say because she wasn't wrong. Is that what this is for you? I asked quietly, just breaking the pattern. She leaned back, exhaling like she'd been holding something in. Partly, but also, I think I just miss being around someone who sees things fresh. What do you mean? You're still curious, she said. Still figuring it out. The world hasn't worn you down yet. I didn't know if that was a compliment or a warning, but I took it as both. She tilted her head, watching the dark horizon. You know, when I was your age, I thought I'd have everything figured out by now. I thought grown-up life came with some kind of instruction manual. And no manual, just chapters you rewrite every few years. I looked at her hands resting on her knees, her nails perfectly done, a silver ring glinting faintly in the moonlight. She carried herself with confidence. But here, right now, she seemed stripped of the polished exterior. Just a woman sitting under the stars was someone who wasn't part of her usual world. And I couldn't help but feel like I was seeing her differently, too. Not as a client, not as some fantasy, but as a person, complex, present, real. Do you regret anything? I asked, not really thinking it through. She smiled, but not with her mouth, just a flicker in her eyes. Plenty, she said, but regrets are boring. I'm more interested in what's still possible. We felt quiet again, and this time the silence didn't need filling. Felt like part of the conversation. Eventually, she stood and brushed off her pants. We should head back before the coyotes get curious. Yeah, I said, though I didn't move. She looked down at me, her expression unreadable. Ethan, you know this isn't normal, right? I know. You okay with that? I looked up at her. Yeah, I am. She nodded once as if that settled something for both of us. The drive back was quiet again, but in a different way. Not uncertain, not awkward, just settled. We didn't need to say much. Back at her house, she parked the car in the driveway and turned off the ignition. The house lights were low, the pool glowing softly in the backyard like it had been waiting for us to return. She reached for the door, paused, and looked over at me. Come in for a bit? I could have said no. I probably should have, but instead I just nodded. Inside, the house felt different than it had earlier. Less like a museum and more like a place with corners you wanted to discover. She led me into the kitchen again, barefoot and casual now, her hair slightly tangled from the drive. The perfume she wore earlier had faded into something softer, more familiar. She poured 2 mugs of coffee, strong, dark, and handed me one like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Do you always keep coffee at midnight?" I asked, smiling. "Only for unexpected company." We sat at the counter, mugs between our hands, the kitchen bathed in warm under cabinet light. It felt like the kind of moment that doesn't ask questions. It just unfolds. "You're different," she said finally. "Different how you listen," she said. Many people do." I wasn't sure what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. I just looked at her and she looked back, and for a second the age difference didn't matter. The jobs didn't matter. The house, the pool, the night, it all blurred. The coffee was half gone, the silence still holding when she set her mug down gently and said, "Come on." I raised an eyebrow again. "One more stop," she said, smiling without showing teeth. "You said you didn't have plans." She wasn't wrong. I followed her through the side door of the house, where the convertible still sat warm in the driveway. The night air had thickened a little, warmer than before, but calm, like the kind of quiet you only get near the ocean. We didn't speak much during the drive. The top was still down, the wind tugging at our hair, the low hum of the engine barely louder than the waves we could occasionally hear as we followed the coast. Sophia turned the radio on low. A soft jazzy track I didn't recognize played in the background. The kind of song that didn't ask for attention, but changed the mood anyway. I leaned back into the seat, the leather warm against my back, and just let it happen. After a while, the road narrowed and she pulled into a small gravel lot tucked between 2 dunes. A narrow wooden sign barely lit by a single bulb red. I would have driven right past it on my own. She parked and turned the key, letting the silence settle. "You sure they're open?" I asked, glancing at the empty lot. "For me, they are." She led the way down a wooden path toward a tiny beachfront bar, half hidden by seagrass and shadow. Inside, it felt more like someone's home than a business. Dim lights, flickering candles, and maybe 5 or 6 tables, most of them empty. A bartender in his 50s nodded at her like they'd known each other for years. "Two?" he asked. "Same booth," she replied. We slid into a curved booth near the window where you could just barely see the white caps of the waves through the glass. She ordered a glass of red. I went with ginger ale. Something about the place made me feel like I didn't need to perform. I could just be. The conversation had picked up slowly. She told me about her first car, an ancient Volvo that barely made it up hills, and how she once drove it all the way to Big Sur just to feel like she had a reason to cream us. I laughed. "That's oddly specific." She grinned. "So was the heartbreak." I shared the story of the summer I tried to build a treehouse for my little brother, only for the thing to collapse 2 hours after we finished. We both laughed hard enough that a couple at the bar glanced over and smiled. From there, the walls came down a little more. She told me about her last relationship, how it ended not in anger, but in silence. "Sometimes," she said, tracing a line in the condensation on her glass, "the loneliest things are the ones no one talks about." I nodded, understanding more than I wanted to admit. She asked what I wanted to do with my life, and I shrugged. "I don't know yet. I like working with my hands. I like quiet. That's enough for now." "That's rare," she said. "Most people are chasing something loud." "And you?" I asked. "What are you chasing?" She paused, then smiled softly. Moments like this. It wasn't the kind of answer that needed unpacking. We left the bar a little before midnight. The lot was still mostly empty, the breeze cooler now. As we walked back toward the car, she didn't rush, didn't lead too far ahead. We were just 2 people moving through the dark together. At the driver's door, she turned to me and said, "Want to see something?" I nodded. "Of course." We didn't go far, just a few minutes up a steep, winding road. She pulled off onto a narrow shoulder and turned off the headlights. The road was dark except for the faint glow from the ocean far below. "There's a bench just ahead," she said, pointing to a trail. We walked a short distance, the crunch of gravel underfoot, until we reached the cliff's edge. The bench was old, peeling paint, facing out over the water, like it had been placed there by someone who knew how to find peace. We sat, shoulders barely touching. The stars were clearer here, brighter. You know, she said after a while, I used to come here every week just to remind myself that the world keeps going no matter what's happening in my life. I looked at her. And does it help? She nodded. Eventually. For a while we didn't speak. The wind moved through the tall grass behind us. The ocean kept breathing below. Then she turned toward me slightly, her voice softer than before. You made me laugh tonight. Really laugh. I didn't realize how much I missed that. I'm glad I could help, I said. And I meant it. She looked at me for a long second like she was trying to figure something out. Then she smiled again, the kind of smile that didn't need words. When we stood, she didn't say, let's go, or time to leave. She just reached for her keys and started walking. And I followed. We got back to her house just past midnight. The engine shut off, and for a moment, neither of us moved. The soft ticking of the car cooling off filled the silence along with the distant hum of the ocean below. I thought that was the end of the night, that she'd say something like, thanks for the company, and I'd head home with a head full of what-ifs. But she didn't move to end anything. Instead, she sat back in her seat, hands still resting on the steering wheel, looking out through the windshield at nothing in particular. Come on, she said after a beat, almost like an afterthought. Let's sit by the pool for a while. I didn't hesitate this time. We went in through the side gate, and the pool was still lit beneath the surface, the water glowing in shades of turquoise and silver, reflecting against the white tiles of the house. Everything was still. The sky was wide open above us, dark and velvet-like, with stars blinking quietly behind the thin strands of cloud. She grabbed a couple of towels from a cabinet on the patio, then kicked off her shoes and rolled up her pants. I followed her lead, doing the same. We sat side by side at the edge of the pool, dipping our feet in. The water was cooler than I expected, refreshing, inviting. Neither of us spoke at first. We just let our feet sway gently beneath the surface, sending ripples across the calm. The quiet wrapped around us like a blanket, not heavy, not forced, just easy. She sipped her coffee yet again, now lukewarm, and looked over at me. This was a good night, she said simply. Yeah, I agreed. It was. She nodded slowly, then stared down at the water. You know, it's easy to feel invisible when you live alone long enough. I looked at her, surprised by how casually she said it. I have friends, she went on, work contacts, people who check in on holidays, but it's not the same. It's like I'm always playing a part, keeping everything polished and polite. And with me, I asked, curious. She shrugged. You're not trying to be anything. You just are. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said the only honest thing I could. You make it easy to be myself. She smiled. Not the coy kind. Not the teasing one from earlier. This one was warmer, more vulnerable. I don't think I've laughed like that in a long time, she said quietly, or sat with someone without feeling like I had to lead the conversation. I looked down at the ripples brushing against my calves. That's probably the nicest thing anyone said to me in a while. Her shoulder brushed mine as she shifted slightly on the towel. You'd be surprised how rare it is, she said, to feel seen. There it was again. That subtle thing between us, not spoken outright, but clear enough in the space between our words. The fact that we were still sitting here long after dinner and drinks and laughter had ended said more than either of us needed to put into sentences. I glanced over at her, and in that moment her eyes weren't guarded. They weren't assessing or playful, just open. What are you thinking about? She asked. I hesitated then. That this doesn't feel like a one-time thing. She turned her head toward me, watching. No, it doesn't. We sat there for a while longer, our feet moving slowly in the water, the stars watching in silence above. At some point, the wind picked up a little. She reached down, pulled one of the towels over her shoulders, and looked back toward the house. You want to come in? She asked. Not coy, not suggestive, just a simple question. I nodded. Inside, the house felt quieter than before. She turned on a few small lights. Nothing harsh, just enough to soften the space. The kitchen, the living room, the hall. It all felt more like a home now than earlier in the day. Like I was being allowed to see the unfiltered version of her. She poured 2 fresh mugs of coffee. This time, we didn't sit at the counter. She led me to a couch near the window that overlooked the backyard where the pool still glowed in soft blues and whites. She tucked her legs under herself and pulled the towel tighter around her shoulders. "You're too young to be this calm," she said, smiling. I smirked. Maybe I've just been around enough of chaos to appreciate quiet. I get that. We sipped in silence for a few minutes. I could feel the drowsiness starting to settle in. Not the kind that makes you want to leave, but the kind that makes everything feel warmer, softer. She looked over at me again, the light from the kitchen casting a soft glow on her cheek. "Tonight made me feel alive again," she said. "Not just entertained, not distracted, really awake." I didn't respond right away because I felt it too. Like this wasn't a fluke or a coincidence or a bored evening. Like maybe we both stumbled into something we didn't know we needed. And neither of us was ready for it to end. We were still on the couch, our second round of coffee, slowly cooling in the mugs on the table. I was sitting sideways, elbow resting on the back cushion, watching her as she talked. Nothing heavy, just a story about a trip to Paris she took years ago. She told it casually, like she didn't expect it to impress me, and that made it feel more personal somehow, like she wasn't showing off. She was just sharing a piece of herself. Her voice was softer now, like the hour itself made everything feel closer, more intentional. I wasn't tired, not really. If anything, the late hour felt like a permission slip to let things move slower, to not worry about how this might look or where it might lead. "I still remember how the air smelled there," she said, staring out the window. "Cigarettes and fresh bread and something I couldn't name. Sounds a lot better than the usual chlorine and sunscreen I deal with." She laughed lightly, pulling the towel tighter around her shoulders. "Maybe, but there's something comforting about the ordinary, too." I looked at her for a second before asking, "Is this ordinary to you?" She met my eyes, didn't look away. No, not even close. She stood up slowly, like the moment didn't need to be broken, just stretched into something new. "Come on," she said, nodding toward the backyard. We stepped out again, barefoot on the cool tile. The pool still glowed faintly, the colors more subdued now, like even it had started to wind down for the night. She walked ahead toward the edge and sat down again, feet slipping back into the water with a familiar ease. I joined her, the night air brushing against the back of my neck. A quiet reminder that this was real. Not a dream, not something I'd imagined. "Why are you really here?" she asked. Not accusing, just wondering. I thought about it. "Because you invited me." That's the surface answer. "Okay," I said, thinking. "Because something about this, about you, makes me feel like I'm not just passing through." She looked at me a moment longer, then nodded, like that made sense to her. "That's rare," she said. "Most people come and go. They don't even notice what they leave behind." There was a pause. She dipped her fingers into the water, letting the ripples stretch out in soft circles. "I've had people come into my life with big gestures, grand plans, promises, but they always want something, or they expect me to be someone I'm not. And me, you don't expect anything," she said. "You're just here." We sat in that thought for a while. The wind moved gently across the surface of the water, sending tiny waves lapping against the tile. "You ever think about how weird this is?" I asked. She smiled. "Of course, but not in a bad way. I mean, I showed up to clean your pool and I offered you lemonade," she said. "That was the real turning point." I laughed. "Right. That lemonade changed everything." She leaned back on her hands, legs still dangling in the water. "You know what's funny?" "What?" "I almost canceled the appointment. I had a rough morning. I wasn't in the mood to talk to anyone. But then something told me to let the day unfold." I looked at her. "I'm glad you didn't." "Me too," she said. Silence again. But this time, it felt like a shared breath, a moment with its own heartbeat. "I don't want to go to bed yet," she said after a while. "Feels like if I fall asleep, this will vanish. Like I'll wake up and it'll be just another day and you'll be gone." I looked over at her. "I'm still here." "I know," she whispered, "but mornings make everything feel distant, logical." I understood exactly what she meant. The late night carried a softness that morning light rarely allowed. She stood again and reached for the towel, now slightly damp at the ends. You want to stay a little longer? Sure. She disappeared inside for a moment and came back out with a fresh blanket and a pair of mugs. This time filled with something that smelled like vanilla and cinnamon. No more caffeine, she said. This is for comfort, not energy. We settled on 2 loungers, pulling the blanket over our legs. The night sky had deepened. Stars spread wider now. The pool shimmered quietly beside us, like it was listening. She turned her head toward me, eyes tracing mine. I don't want to label this. You don't have to. I just want it to be real. It already is. She smiled softly, then turned back to the sky, and that was it. No big moment, no dramatic gesture. Just 2 people wrapped in a quiet that felt entirely their own. The first blush of sunrise started to color the sky. Neither of us had slept. We hadn't even moved from the loungers by the pool. At some point during the night, the warmth of the blanket, the silence, and the closeness had woven into something that didn't ask for more than presence. Not touch, not talk, just being near each other. Watching the sky shift, Sophia sat beside me, her head resting lightly against the back of the lounge chair, eyes half open. I guess we made it, she said quietly, her voice still rough from sleepiness. To sunrise? I asked. She nodded. The sky was streaked with soft oranges and pinks now, the edge of the ocean glowing, like it had been waiting all night just to perform. A few birds started to call out, breaking the stillness with their first songs of the day. She turned to me, brushing hair off her forehead. Let's go down to the beach. I looked at her, unsure if she was serious. Really? I asked. She smiled. Then we're already up. I followed her inside where we pulled on hoodies and grabbed 2 travel mugs of the cinnamon tea. Then we made the short drive to a nearby public access point. She knew one of those half-hidden spots between 2 residential streets where the stairs led straight down to the sand. The beach was empty, still damp from the night air. The tide was low, the waves small and gentle, rolling in with a rhythm that made you feel like everything in the world was exhaling. We sat on a blanket she kept in the trunk of her car, wrapped in it together, legs stretched out in front of us, mugs warming our hands. The sky opened wider, the orange deepening into gold, the sun beginning its slow climb. I don't want this to be confusing, she said after a while. I turned toward her. It's not. She raised an eyebrow, skeptical. Really? I think things only get confusing when people try to force them into a box. She looked out toward the water. I've been in enough boxes for one lifetime. I didn't press her, just sipped the tea, feeling the steam on my face. I don't want labels, she said again. More to herself than to me. Not a title, not a timeline, not some expectation of what this is supposed to be. I don't either, I said. She looked at me then. Then what do you want? I paused, not because I didn't know, but because it felt like the kind of moment where words had weight. I want this, I said finally. Whatever it is, whatever it becomes, I want it to be honest. Real. She leaned her head on my shoulder, letting out a breath that sounded like relief. Good, she whispered. The sun finally breached the horizon, casting golden light across the waves. Our shadows stretched long behind us, and for a moment, I couldn't remember the last time I felt this calm, this sure. There was no talk of what came next. No discussions about next week or how we'd fit into each other's lives. That didn't matter right now. What mattered was that we were there together. Later, we walked the shoreline in silence, our footsteps leaving twin trails behind us. A few joggers had started to appear, a dog or 2 chasing waves. The world slowly waking up, but none of it touched us. We were in our own rhythm. Now back at her place, the house still quiet. She handed me a folded towel and a smile. You can shower here if you want. There's coffee. Real coffee. Not the sweet kind. I grinned. You're spoiling me. She shrugged, already walking toward the kitchen. You deserve it. That's how it started. Not with a dramatic kiss or a declaration, but with gestures. With a rhythm that grew, quiet, intentional, unspoken. I'd show up to service the pool and leave a little later each time. Sometimes I wouldn't even touch the equipment. Sometimes we'd drive the coast for no reason. Other times we'd sit by the water wrapped in the same blanket saying almost nothing at all. There were no rules, no promises, just a shared space where we could both exist as we were. No need to perform, no need to explain, and that was enough. She didn't ask me to define anything, and I didn't try to. We kept it just hours away from questions, from assumptions, from outside eyes. What does it mean to stumble into a moment that feels so alive it defies the ordinary yet carries the weight of unspoken boundaries? As you reflect on Ethan and Sophia's story, consider this. When have you felt a connection that broke through your routine, making you question what you thought you knew about yourself? This narrative invites us to explore a profound lesson. Life's most meaningful experiences often come unscripted in fleeting moments that demand courage to embrace. What can we learn from their night of shared silences, spontaneous drives, and quiet confessions by the pool? Doesn't it challenge us to ask how often we let fear of the unknown stop us from seizing what feels real? Ethan, caught in the rhythm of his everyday work, finds in Sophia a presence that awakens him not just to attraction, but to the possibility of being truly seen. Her words, "You're making it hard for me to behave," reveal a truth. Authenticity often pulls us toward uncharted paths where vulnerability becomes a strength. Their story, woven with moonlight drives, shared laughter, and a refusal to label what's unfolding, teaches us that connection doesn't need a name to be profound. The risk of their closeness, shadowed by the world's expectations, mirrors our own moments of choosing between safety and something that stirs the soul. Haven't we all felt the pull of a moment we knew couldn't last, yet shaped us forever? Their bond, fragile yet vibrant, reminds us to cherish the now, even when tomorrow is uncertain. When have you let a moment redefine you despite the risks? Share your story into the comments. Your words might inspire someone else to embrace their truth. If this tale moved you, hit that subscribe button and join our community. Let's keep exploring the lessons that make life extraordinary.